Hello, I'm Stacy from Truly Majestic. Let's arm knit up the knit stitch blanket. If you're using wool roving, please lightly felt it before you begin this blanket. Now for the cast on, we're going to do a mock long tail cast on, which is really nice and decorative and not too stretchy. So we're going to start by just tying a knot with a loop. Very simple. Leave the end of your yarn hanging in the front of the loop and the back, and then pull the extra yarn around to the front and pull it through the loop. Now we are going to simply be pulling the yarn through to make a loop, putting our arm through it, pulling it through that loop, putting our arm through that loop, and continuing on until we have done this 17 times, which will create 17 stitches. You can tell how many stitches you have by counting these little bumps on the side. And the one on my arm is the last bump. You'll notice on one side will be a braid or plait, and the other side will have little tiny bumps like hyphens. I make the first stitch of the first row by pulling up at an angle into the last loop. So one more loop pulled up at an angle. We're going to be putting loops into all of the dashes on the back side of the braid or plait. So you want to make sure that you find all these dashes and you know you're on the right side of the yarn. If your chain has dashes and braids on the same side, then you need to rip it out and redo it and start over and make sure you're doing the loops exactly the same all the way through. So the next loop, we just pull our yarn through it and try to make sure you get the loops all the same size. They don't have to be exactly the same, but try to keep them similar. We're going to carry on making these loops through the little dashes all the way till the very end of the chain. The last dash looks a little bit funny, but it's in the very end, and you should now have 17 loops on this chain. You want the braided or plaited end to be facing you when you knit, and this bumpy end should be in the back, away from you. And you also want to make sure the end of your yarn is going to end up at the end of your hand. So make sure you put your hand through the other end of the loops to begin with, so your hand ends up on the end with the working yarn. To do that, we just put our hand straight through the end loop, but the rest of the loops we're going to open up so they're facing us and put our hand through the back of the loop. Open it up, put it through the back. Open it up nice and straight, put it through the back. And we'll do this all the way to the end. Make sure you don't get your loops twisted. It will make your blanket look ugly in the end if you do. To start row 2, we're going to first slip the stitch off of our right arm onto our left arm, and then we're going to knit the rest. To knit, you simply open the loop up nice and flat facing you, pull your yarn from the back of the loop to the front of the loop, and then place the newly made loop onto your left arm. So do this all the way across. Open the loop up, pull the yarn through onto your left arm. We're going to do the very last loop a little bit different, and the last loops on all rows are a little bit different. You grab the yarn and then pull the loop straight off. You don't pull it through the back of the loop, you just pull it straight through the loop on your arm like pulling it through the side. And this makes the stitch sit sideways, so it makes a nice weaved pattern up the side of the blanket. For row 3, we're going to slip the first stitch again and then knit all the rest of the stitches. For this entire blanket, you'll want to slip the first stitch in every row, and the last stitch simply pull the yarn straight through it so it sits sideways. And you do the same thing with every row, no matter if you're knitting from left to right or right to left. Always slip the first stitch on every row, and the last stitch you pull straight through. At the end of this row, I'm going to let you continue on knitting. So you need to do every row exactly the same. Go back and watch the video from the beginning if you need to see how to do rows 2 and 3 again. Keep watching, keep doing it until you have enough yarn left to make one complete row. I've now finished knitting almost all of my yarn. It was 3.5 kilos, and so this is what it should look like. You can see here how the stitches that we've slipped have made this nice braided plaited pattern up the side of our blanket. To finish your blanket, we need to cast off, and that means we're going to be ending the loops. So you need to put your hand through the last loop and then knit one more loop, so you have 2 loops. Pull the back one over the front loop and drop it off. So knit one more loop, then pull the back loop over the front loop and drop it off. These loops need to be bigger than all the rest of your stitches. They need to be very loose and big. If they're too tight, your blanket will end up looking like a pyramid. It'll be the wrong shape. We want it looking like a nice rectangle. Now we're going to weave in the tail to disguise it into the blanket. So you should break off your yarn so you have about maybe a foot or a foot and a half of yarn left over, like this, and you just simply pull it in and out of the stitches. I've left yarn hanging down behind my blanket because I don't want to break this. I have about 5 more projects to knit up with this yarn, but for the purpose of illustration I'm just showing you how to weave the tail into the blanket, and it gets completely disguised. Make sure you're weaving it so it's not sticking out in the front. Your blanket should look something like this when you're finished. Make sure you get both tails woven in from both sides. Happy arm knitting from Truly Majestic. You can find us on our Facebook page, Truly Majestic blog, or you can find us on YouTube at Truly Majestic and follow our videos and tutorials there as well.